All right, it is 12:20, so I'm going to start up. Good afternoon. It is Monday, the 17th of October. The first thing I want to tell you is we can disregard this. I will starting tomorrow again at the regular time. I didn't realize that Mr. Gudmested's class starts at 12:35. So I had somebody, I was on there earlier today, and then somebody said, hey, just so you know, our class doesn't start till 12:35. So what I'm going to have to do is at about 12:45, literally take about 30 seconds to a minute, go over to his Discord server and take a screenshot because that's how we're doing attendance because Mr. Gudmested's out of town this week. All right. So like I said, I will put that down into the email after today, but don't worry, we will start at 12:05 for the rest of the week. So that's the first thing. Second thing, already been asked about grades. So yeah, what happened was I checked yesterday and there are 6 of you in the class and 5 people, according to what I had things that were missing. Now, you may not agree with that, and that's totally okay. All right. I was told by at least one person that they thought that doing that amortization table for the loan app was optional. It wasn't, but it's fine. All right. For the, I don't want anybody to go back and redo it. We've moved on. All right. What I'd appreciate is with what we're working on right now, because with some of you, and again, I'm not being accusory, but what some people did was they put one assignment in one folder, another assignment in another folder, etc. And maybe you were trying to match those up with what we were working on. I'm not sure, and that's fine. But for what we're doing right now, I think we've got either a REST API or an API folder. So with what we're about to start today, if you'd put it in that folder, that would make it easier for me because then I'm looking for it in a common spot. All right. If you decide, no, I don't want to do that, okay, then don't. But send me an email otherwise when everything is turned in, and then let me know where it lives, so to speak. All right. It'll just make it easier for both of us. The other question that got asked, there are still, yesterday I sent out 5 emails. All right. As far as people who had stuff missing or, according to my records, had stuff missing. And Clayton, you got back to me. John got back to me. The other 3 people did not get back to me. All right. So for the rest of you, if you watch this on tape, please look at the email because you're behind on some assignments. And as of right now, I mean, if I don't see that stuff in a day or so, literally it's going to go in, you're already missing points. All right, because a lot of people are turning their homework in on time. So those people are eligible for full credit. But the way I look at it, it's like if you turn it in a day late, typically what we've done is for every business day that it's late, you lose 10%. All right. So just so you have some kind of an idea about that. All right, next. As you can see on your screen right now, and I want to take a couple minutes to go over this. This is one of the things I asked you to look at, and I guess what I'm going to do, hopefully you can see what I didn't realize is when I go in here and I'm in Teams like this and I do a share, I have been always doing window. I should be doing screen because then you're going to see my screen. So you should see everything now that's on my screen. All right. And that's actually, as far as I'm concerned, at least, that's a good thing. All right. Because it'll make it a little easier to go through things. So this is that same article, but it's in a Word format. I thought it might be a little easier to read in here. It's how to create a Node.js Express MVC application. Why is that important? Because that's what we're going to start doing today. All right. You're going to notice that we're going to have a routes folder. We're going to have a models folder. We're going to have a controllers folder. And we're going to, the one thing about this is if you watch enough of these presentations, and I even rewatched a few of them over the weekend on YouTube, there is no 100% standard way of doing this. All right. For lack of better words, most developers do them the way they want to do them, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, a right thing or a wrong thing. But I like this article both for the content and because of the fact that it's only about a month old. All right. And I don't want to sit there and read to you, and I don't want to sit there and keep going over stuff we've gone over. So we should be able to go over this article fairly quickly. It's only like 10 pages, so it's not that long. So you can see what they talk about in here. And the author in this document gives his take on basically how you can set up an MVC or model view controller project. All right. So by now, you should realize, as it says, MVC is an architectural pattern. In many ways, it's not identical, but in many ways, it's sort of synonymous with what we do when we're doing web design. And what I mean is, when you think about it in web design, what do? Well, we've got we try to take a web document and break it down so that our JavaScript files are in their own folder and by themselves, so that our CSS files are in their own folder and by themselves, and that our HTML files are basically by themselves. All right. So it's not a great correlation, but it's not a terrible one either. So with Model View Controller, we've already been working with model. Even if you don't realize it, we're going to continue to do so. All right, we have been creating models, and models basically has anything to do with the data. All right, so our schema, etc., all that kind of stuff. All right, we've also been dealing with views. And I mentioned to you, as far as views go, that there are different ways that you can do views. You know, we are using EJS, embedded JavaScript. It's possible to use Pug. There's handlebars, there's mustache, there's a bunch more. And it is even possible that when you set this up, it's possible to set it up and not use any of these and just basically do it the way that we kind of did it in the AWD1111 class. That's not recommended, but sometimes people do it that way anyway. So again, as it says there, the model defines the data part of the application. The view determines the user interface, for lack of better words. And the controller, as it says here, is the glue between the two. Technically, there should never, ever be any direct communication between the model and the view. So in other words, when a URL comes in, all right, there might be several different controllers, and programmatically, the right controller is selected to service the request, the HTTP request that comes in. And typically what that controller will do is it'll pass it off to the model, all right, that, that needs to be called to be able to service that request. The model oftentimes will go out to a database, find the information that's being looked for, and that information will be returned then to the controller. All right. The controller will basically get it into shape, so to speak. There's really very little processing should ideally be done in the controller, but then it'll go out to the view or it'll be dispersed to the end user as HTML. And that pretty much is it. I mean, you know now with that REQ and that RES that we've been putting on everything, REQ is the HTTP request, RES is the HTTP response. So the user makes the request, the system sends back a response. Again, that shouldn't be really anything new. So they go through an example in here. And again, the idea is as you're going through and doing this, this is a pretty simple example. You'll notice that all they bring in here is Express, EJS, and body parser. All right, so here's your package.json, nothing new in there, okay? But it says, apart from the dependencies, we have a few basic scripts for starting. Yeah, because we come in there and basically we've got our start and our dev start that we've been using. All right. So next, as it says, now that the project is ready, let's first create a model for the application. It's totally legitimate that you could have multiple models in the same application. All right. And these models may or may not be communicative with one another. In other words, one model might handle logging people in. All right. Another model may be for the data. So if it's, if you've got something where, let's say that there is a some kind of an e-commerce app. All right. You might have one thing. So when the user comes in, they have to log in. And typically the idea of being logged in, and this is something that should make sense to you by now. Typically, what's happening when you are logging in is really two different things. And it is a combination of authentication and authorization. All right. And as far as authentication goes, all right, let me see who's here. John's here. All right. Hello, John. We're just starting, and I'm going through this article right here. This is one of the ones that I'd given you the other day. It's from progressivecoder.com, and it's how to create a Node.js Express MVC application. All right, we talked about what MVC is, but that should just have been some review. And they mention in here, again, in the example that they show in here, they got a very simple product model that they're going to create. They're going to create a view using EJS, and there'll be a controller. All right, and this is right where we got back to. And what I just mentioned is I said, as an example, when you are working in an e-commerce app, typically, if you go out to an app with the idea that you want to buy something, let's say, you will typically have to log in. And as I mentioned, the act of logging in is a combination of authentication and authorization. When you are authenticated, basically the system is saying who you are. So in other words, when you've got a login and a password, that it's going to go and check and make sure that that login and that password are in a database someplace. All right. If they're not, you should be given the opportunity, typically, that you can register. All right. So again, I mean, if I don't have an account with Amazon, but I want to buy something, they're sure as heck not going to say, well, you're not logged in, you can't buy anything, and you can't have an account. No, they will welcome me in and want me to have an account. All right. And as far as authorization, the authorization should take place after you've been authenticated. After the system knows who you are, all right, then it will basically come in and authorize and say, okay, you are a person X, you can do this, you are person Y, you can do this. I mentioned this in an earlier class that when you look at it, again, maybe not the best of analogies, but if you look at it from somebody who's working at a bank, that if I'm a personal banker at a bank and I log in, at my work computer, I'm not going to be able to see the same things that somebody else who's a personal banker can see. All right. We both come in, we're both authenticated, but we're both authorized to see different things. All right. So they run through this. Now, one thing to realize in this example right here, they're not using a database. They're creating a model, but they're not working with a database. So when you look at this, this is a good example, yet not a good example. And what I mean is, since they're not using a database, they're just using JSON to go in and create stuff. All right, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Hopefully you understand how that could get really big really fast, and it wouldn't be a very good way to do things. But for a simple little example, it works just fine. But they do say in here, they create a special folder called models. You don't have to call it models, but again, by default, that's typically what it's called. All right. And typically at the bottom too, and you're going to see this already today, I don't know where it is, somewhere in your code, you're going to have a module.export statement like we have right here. You're going to see that today. Now, last week when I gave you a bunch of URLs, and I went back and watched them, and some of them were better than others. I realized that. And I really would have been surprised if any of you said, yeah, I watched the two that were both over an hour each. But, like I said, some of them did a really good job of explaining things. Some of them I watched the first few minutes of because they were pretty good, and then they got bad after that. But when you export, and you're going to see this today, but when you export, you're taking a file and, for lack of better words, making the content that you export available to another file or files. And more than anything else, that's what it's all about. You're making something available. All right. And the reason that that's important is, again, we want to come in and we want to start segregating out what we've been doing. We don't want everything that we do. Again, we don't want everything that we do to be inside of the same app.js file. That's kind of what we've been doing so far. Really, we put our model in there and we have put our controllers in there and our routes. All right. Well, now we're going to start again segregating those out. The only thing we've segregated out so far has been the view. All right. So it says after the model, we can now create the view part of the application. There is no set standard for the way that you create this. And what I mean is, today we're going to be, as soon as we get started on our project in a couple minutes, we are going to be concentrating on setting up an MVC architecture. Also, there's basically going to be two things that we're going to be worried about in here. One is users, because we want users to have the ability to log in. All right. And the other one, I'm jumping right in, rather than that to-do thing, I'm jumping right in to our movies example. So we're going to be concerned with two different schemas. We're going to be concerned with the user schema, and we're going to be concerned with our movie schema that we've been working with. Now, today we're going to concentrate almost solely on the user schema, and we'll bring the other stuff in tomorrow. All right. And the reason for that is it gives me a chance to discuss a few other things. All right. So this is the EJS file. There really shouldn't be a lot. There's, looking at this from right here, other than the fact that they've got an include for their header and an include for their footer, they're not even using any templating when they're using any of the other tags in here. So there shouldn't be anything in there that you don't understand, is what I'm saying. In the shop.ejs, I think there is some stuff in there, and you'll notice, again, this is review, I understand. But if we look at this if statement that starts here and it ends somewhere down here, all right, you do have to realize, again, that when we're using these tags and when we use the less than followed by the % sign and nothing after that, that allows us to put JavaScript code right into our EJS file. But this is code that can be executed, but it doesn't print anything. When we want to print stuff, we've got to go in and add that equal sign to it. All right, again, unless we're just including a file as shown up here. So again, that stuff should by now all make sense to you. The other thing they do in here, and the other reason I like this particular example, is really what we should be starting to do is starting to think about something like this. And what it is, it looks really simplistic, but it's a 404.ejs page. We should start thinking about having some kind of a common page so that when the user tries doing virtually anything that could have an error, that maybe we call this page up, and we've got here page not found, but it could be in here that what we would add in here instead of page not found is we could bring in, excuse me, either another page, or we could bring in a message in there, because sometimes you get at 404 because a file's not found. All right, that's typically what that error means. All right, but the file might not be found for a lot of different reasons. All right, and maybe on this 404, maybe you want a more generic page, and maybe you want to tell somebody also they don't have permissions to use that file, or the file has moved and or the file has been deleted or whatever. All right. Okay. Yeah, they mentioned that they're using partials in there. There shouldn't be anything new there. There's the header partial, there's the navigation, and there's their footer. So nothing really new there. All right. So we've talked a little bit about models. We've talked a little bit about views, and this thing ends with talking about controllers. And again, I can't say this to you too many times. Two things. First of all, there is no set way in how to do this. And that leads into the second thing, and that is we're going to have a separate folder for our controllers as opposed to our routes. Some people don't do that. All right. So what's going to end up happening is, for lack of better words, it's kind of like what we talked about in the C# class, because more and more we're modularizing. We're creating more files, but the files that we create are going to be smaller in size. So again, they show an example in here. All right. And we're going to have at least a couple different files that are going to have the same name. We're going to have a user.js file, and we're going to have that use not EJS, but a user.js file. We'll have one in our controllers folder, and we'll have one in our models folder. All right. It's totally legit to have them have the same name. In fact, some people will tell you that they'd recommend it because you can see exactly what goes with what. By no means do you have to give them the same name. All right. So as they say in their example here, they put in logic to allow you to render a product view and a product list view. Okay, fine. All right. But what should end up happening then is, like I said, many of your files are going to end up getting a lot smaller. In fact, it says here, as we mentioned earlier, controllers are independent on the routers. Therefore, we can create routers in our application using Express Router. We're going to do that today. All right, it says we keep the routed files in a routes directory or folder. That is, again, typically what you do. That's what we're going to follow today. But, when you get, as we write this, if you start thinking, well, geez, I wouldn't do it that way. Yeah, that's fine. You're thinking outside of the box a little bit, and that's totally fine. All right. What should happen then when you look in here is our app.js file gets smaller. So what's changed? Well, when you look in here, the stuff at the beginning we're still going to have. Body parser, express, path, whatever. All that stuff is still going to happen in there. You're still going to have your app.set for your view engine and setting up your views folder. Those things aren't new. And at the bottom, you're still going to have your app.listen. But take a look at the rest of the stuff that's in there and you'll start to see what's changed. Notice that we're bringing in some controller files. All right. Now, in order for us to be able to use that controller file, somewhere in that controller file, there better be an export statement. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. The other thing too, which kind of differentiates using user-defined files as opposed to system files, is our files. In other words, our model files, our route files, our controller files must start with a ./. And the dot just means, basically, in this case, dot is just at the root node. All right, so under our root node, this says we are going to have a controllers folder. And that controllers folder will have a file in it that's called error.js. Again, it is not mandatory that when you put that in, that you put in the .js on the end. You'll notice that down here for the admin routes, they don't have an admin.js and a shop.js. All right. So hopefully what you're starting to see is you get one or more controllers and you get one or more routes that are in there and you put all that stuff in. All right. So that was quick. The code is out there on GitHub. Basically, it's just a repetition of what I just went over with you. All right. I'm just going to keep going and I'm going to figure if any of you have any questions on anything, you're going to ask. All right. Okay, so before we go on, there's just one more thing that I wanted to mention to you, and that is this. We are going to be working with JSON Web Tokens. This is one way that as somebody logs in, all right, you are able to verify and do the authentication/authorization. All right. Now, there's a lot of different things that you can go to for this. This is basically the home page, and it's jwt.io. All right. And there is a little bit of introduction. It's not a beautiful site or anything like that, but they explain what this is about. So as we look at it in here, as they say, it's an open standard that defines a way to securely transmit information between parties as a JSON object. That's good. It says the information can be verified and trusted because it is digitally signed. And it can be signed using either a secret key or a public/private key. And what's the difference? All right, what you're going to find typically is when you go out to an API that's not yours. So for instance, if you go out to the openweather.org API, if you go out there and you take a look and you apply for a key, which is free, you get two keys. You get a public key and you get a private key. Typically, most everything you do is going to be done with the public key. And the public key is one you can share with everybody and anybody. The private key should not be shared. All right. And they go through this right now much better than I could. And my guess is probably, and I don't think that I even gave you this as one of the sites to take a look at. It's got a good explanation of what's going on. But again, it's allowing us to authenticate and to authorize more than anything else. Now, I did go out and I found, where is it? I found this, the basics of JWT for dummies. And I don't mean that you're dummies. I'm more of a dummy than you are, but it gives this, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. Now, before I do, let me do one thing, and you heard this before, Clayton, you didn't hear this, John, but I'm going out here. I am subbing for Mr. Gudmested this week. So I went out to his Discord server and I am taking a picture of everybody who's logged in because I'm supposed to do that 2 or 3 times today, and that's how he's taking attendance. Okay, so let me jump back then. So with these basics, as it says, JWT are mostly used to authenticate users in the context of websites and web applications. So they go through an example in here. And I'm not even going to say it's a good example or a bad example. All right. But it says, that if you're working, they give a mythical application and they say that it can do a bunch of fancy stuff, but each user should only have access to what they're authorized to do. It says, so as an example, user with ID 123 should only be able to do the stuff that 123 is allowed to do. So they go through it here, a very simple, and it may not look like it, but it really is a very simple scenario of what's going on in here. All right. So as it says, the user tries to log in with their username and password. That is going to be checked. What are we talking about here? Well, you're going to see this in just a few minutes, but it means that one of two things are going to happen. All right. That if you are at a login page and it checks and it finds a matching login and password, it should log you in. On the other hand, if it comes in and either you mistype something or you don't have an account, you should probably be pushed towards a register page, all right, or some kind of an error page. So as it says here, you log in, you check the stuff with a database server. If everything is fine, if it all worked, you generate a token and you sign in with a secret key. As it says there, the browser saves the token. All right. When the user tries to access their profile, the system looks at it and says, yes, you are able to do this. No, you are not able to do this. All right. So it says here, looking at this diagram, you notice two things. Number one, once the user browser has the token, the database is no longer needed to authenticate the user. That's why it's known as stateless authentication. What's basically happening here, all right? And the reason for this is different database systems set things up differently. What do I mean? If you remember from the C# class, when we did a little bit of work with SQL Server and the like, we used Windows authentication. With Windows authentication, that's true stateless. And it says, if you're logged onto your Windows account, then you can work with these databases. On the other hand, if we chose SQL Server authentication, not only would we have to log in using Windows for our Windows authentication, we'd have to re-authenticate to make sure that, we knew what typically, again, it would be a login and a password to be able to access a certain database. All right. Second, as it says there, with a token, we can send information about the user. What kind of information? Well, whatever information you decide you want to have stored. All right. And JWT is JSON Web Token. So as it says, the token itself is either sent via a cookie or via an authorization header. It goes in this thing, it's called a bearer, B-E-R-E-R. And it's really broken into two parts, the word bearer and then the actual token itself, which can be really, really big. All right. It's a heck of a lot bigger than even what we looked at for the IDs in MongoDB. It's really big. All right. So as it says, this mangled mess of letters and numbers that you see right up here says is nothing more than encoded JSON. It says, note it is encoded and not encrypted, which means we can easily decode it. That's a really important thing, because some of the stuff that you do when you send it across the wire, it may come in as what's known as either clear text or plain text. And clear text and plain text can be seen by the outside world. All right. Encrypted text cannot. When you encrypt text or when you encrypt something, there's different ways that you can run through encryption. What we're going to look at in just a couple minutes is we're going to look at what's called bcrypt, which is one of the ways that you can do encryption. All right, we'll get there in just a minute. Then it says using the jwt.io website, that's what I just was at with you. It says we can make it really easy for ourselves. It says just paste the JWT and get the decoded JSON data. So this right here is an example of a web token. All right, you can see that it's a lot bigger. All right, and that is in the encoding of what's in here, is what they're saying. All right, so the JWT itself, as mentioned here, is made up of three parts. It's got the header, which is your sign-in information. All right, your payload, and that's whatever it is you decide you want to make available, and then some kind of a footer. All right, so the author says, if you need more input on this presentation, I highly recommend you watch this presentation. The problem is, and I haven't looked at that presentation, so I don't know if it's good or not good. But if you've never noticed it before, it's so easy to get caught into the equivalent of tutorial hell. All right, where you just jump from one YouTube presentation to another. All right, but we got to start working with this stuff. So that's it. Like I said, I don't know if this is any good. I don't know how long this is, etc. I have absolutely no idea. So it's an hour long. All right. So again, I don't know how good it is. A couple thousand people have looked at it. It's also 6 years old. Is it worth your time? Probably not. I will mention though, right, because we're going to start now, but there is one that this is a little older too. It's like, I think 3 years old. I go out to Web Dev Simplified a lot. You may or may not. Maybe you never heard about it. The guy who runs it, that's him right there. His name is Kyle Cook. He tries to put stuff into very common sense type of ways. He's got a couple presentations on JWT. This one is what is JWT and why should you use JWT? And I watched it this morning and it's pretty good. He's got another one that goes through more of an application, but it's about twice this size. All right. Again, do you have to watch this? No. All right. But if you want to learn more about it, or if you're kind of confused about the innards, so to speak, of what we're working on, then you might want to. All right, your call. So with that said, let's get going and do something. All right. So what I'd like you to do, please, is, and am I right now in assuming that you can all see this picture of my granddaughter on the screen? Can one of you say, yes, I can?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because now that we're doing a server, we're doing the screen as opposed to doing those shares. All right. The person who, let's just put it this way. I was misled as far as how to use certain things in Teams, and I had somebody set me straight. So I'll just put all the blame on me. So I'm coming out to my desktop, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this MongoDB underscore REST API. And I'd like you to do the same. We're not going to worry right now about putting this thing on GitHub or anything else. All right. Like I said, there's just a certain amount of things I'd like to get through today. All right. So once we're out there, we're going to kind of do the kind of stuff that we've always done. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a Git Bash here window. All right. And really, again, you've heard me say this before. Sometimes I'll sit there and do this stuff from the command line. Sometimes I'll go in and do what I'm about to do from inside of Visual Studio Code. But really doing it from right here might be the easiest. So I'm going to say here, touch app.js, and that made us an app.js file. So we should be able to see that in here. And there it is. All right, nothing big there. That's totally fine. All right. Next, let's just go in, and as we've done several times, let's do an npm init -y and hit enter. All right, that gave us our default package.json file. All right, I'm going to open that up and make my changes to it. This is nothing new in here. So again, app.js is fine. I'm going to get rid of this test statement, and I'm going to put in my start and my dev start. All right, again, should be nothing new in there. You can add anything else you want. The only other thing you may or may not want to add, it's up to you, is you might want to put your name in there. But this is totally fine for what we're doing right now. All right, so I added a start and a dev start, and I got rid of the test script that was in there, and I put my name in. Now I'm just going to do a file, save. All right, and I'm going to close this. All right, again, nothing new in there really. This is all stuff that we've done before. All right, so going back into my Git Bash window here, again, stuff we've done before, but let's come in here and let's start by doing our npm I -D nodemon. All right, so we're adding nodemon. Nothing new there. We've done this several times before. All right. Now we're going to come in and do our other installs, but we're going to install a few things we have not talked about yet. All right. So I'm going to give you the install, then we're going to go back and we're going to look at a couple of them. Okay. So I'm going to do an npm I, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 6 of them we're going to put in. The first one is bcrypt. So that'll be the first one, that we look at in just a minute. All right, so npm I bcrypt. The next one, I just put these in alphabetic order, is body parser, then is express, then is JSON web token, then is mongoose, and finally Morgan. All right, so I'll leave that up there for just a second. You can put that in. Once you get it in, hit enter. I don't think I've spelled anything incorrectly there. All right, added 161 packages. So hopefully you had time that you could get all that stuff put in. All right. You don't have to do this, but again, just because I like to, I'm going to go back one more time and I'm going to check in my package.json. And there's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things that I just added. And there's NodeMon that I've also added. All right. So we should be ready to get up and going. But before we do, let's go over the 3 things that are in here that are new. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go out to npmjs.org or .com. Either way, it pushes you to the same thing. And first, let's look at bcrypt. All right. What you should notice right away is there's a bunch of these things in here with bcrypt on them. All right. I don't know how many there are. I don't really care. All right. We're going to just use the first one here. So let's click on this. And you'll notice that last week it had 1 million downloads. So again, anything that you look at in here, the more downloads it has, the better, because it means people are using it, which means people are testing the heck out of it, which means if there are problems, they should be being found. Now I'm going to go out next to the GitHub page for this. All right. And let's see. They talk about some security issues with this. All right. Dependencies with this, installing it. All right. Here's some of the usage. We'll look at some of this stuff. All right. But when you look here under usage, and if you go down near the bottom of the page where you can see the little thing that kind of looks like a broken paper clip, it says to hash a password. All right. And that is one thing that we're going to be caring about. All right. When you hash a password, what we want to do is we basically want to start the encryption process. When you start the encryption process here, typically what you add to this is what's called a salt, an SALT, salt, as they mentioned right here. All right. Every time you run a salt on this, it's supposed to make it that much more secure. I mean, you literally could salt something 10,000 times. First of all, it would take a while, all right, and it might really slow down the program. But what's considered to be a pretty good number when you're salting like this is 10. All right, that's a pretty common number that it's called, how many rounds are you going to do with your salt? And as you can see up there, they set the salt rounds to 10. So again, this is just a way that you can go through, and we're going to do something similar to this. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be providing inside of a form. All right, we will have a password field. And as you know, that password field, if we set up the type to password, it'll go in as those little black dots. All right. But when we run this, what we're going to be telling it is to basically take our plain text thing and we're going to tell it to hash that, because what it's going to be checked against in the database is something that's already been salted. And what we're trying to check here is we're trying to make sure that whatever we put in for a password matches what's in the database. All right. And if you say, well, that's just simple, good. All right. Now, as they mentioned here, bcrypt uses whatever promise implementation is available. All right, so we may end up using some work in here with promises. You may or may not remember this, but when you start to work with promises, and this is an example. So they're calling this, and the dot then, basically that's holding your callback function. So if once this works and is completed, it'll then call that function. All right. And you can chain as many dot thens on there as you want to or need to do. Most often, if you've got several of them, here there's only one, but if there's several, you put the dot thens down below. Also, typically you end this with a dot catch, at least one, all right, where you've got some kind of a generic error handler. All right. One thing I have not mentioned to you, but just so you know it. All right. And I don't remember, I can look if you're interested, or you can look it up. But if I go back here into our project and I go back into package.json, there is something up here. I don't remember what it is, but there is some kind of a thing you can add in here. All right. It's one line of code. I don't use it, but you can. And the reason I'm telling you that is if you put in that one line of code, then what you can do, don't have to, but can do, is rather than saying like we do, const bcrypt equal require bcrypt, you can say import bcrypt from bcrypt. Who cares? Well, that's considered the newer way of doing it, is to use imports. There's really no difference that I've ever read about, other than it can save you a little bit of typing. All right. But either one of these will work, is what I'm telling you. All right. So it says technique. Yeah, they go through how to salt it. They go through how to check the password. All right. And they mention that you should do this in an asynchronous manner. This shouldn't be anything new to you either by now. All right. It says if you use bcrypt on a server, it says it's CPU intensive. So in other words, it can slow everything down virtually to a crawl. All right. So you typically will put that into an async with an await on that. You may remember we looked at a little bit of this before, not a lot, but we've looked at a little bit. And async and await are basically the successors to promises, which is the successor to regular callbacks. All right. So they go through some of the stuff. I don't know if there's anything else. Again, a note on rounds. So if you need some more on that, okay, there's a little bit more. Okay. Says on a thing on timing attacks, it says the bcrypt library is not susceptible to timing attacks. All right. There can be different types of attacks with timing attacks. And it says they've even got a thing in here. All right. But there's a lot of ways a system can be attacked. All right. And usually with a timing attack, again, it depends on how your system is set up. But sometimes, at least with a timing attack, what people will do is they'll write some kind of a program that'll go through literally millions of different username and password scenarios in a matter of seconds. And it'll keep going through until it starts to find matches. All right. But they're saying is, I've even read that if you salt up to what I'm trying to remember the number, and I could be wrong here. I think that they said if you salt up to like 40 times, literally it can take up to 256 years to find what you're looking for. All right, so you see how reliable that can be. So there's more stuff in here. If you have any desire, yeah, fine, go ahead and take a look at it. All right, so that was the first one. The second one we've talked about a little bit already, but let's just go back again. So I'm going to jump back up here and back over here, and one more time. And we are going to put in here then, we are going to put in JSON Web Token. And if you haven't already figured it out, JSON Web Token is the JWT we were talking about. JWT, J for JSON, W for web, and T for token. All right. So as it says, JSON Web Token implementation, symmetric and asymmetric. And again, when we bring this up, you'll notice 9.5 million downloads. All right. So we've already done the install. Okay. And again, as always, it has its own GitHub page. So you can go in if you need to, want to, and take a look at it. All right. If you want to look at it in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage than we just did. All right. All right. And finally, the other one that's in there. And again, I'm not spending much time on this because I already showed you the JWT homepage, and we talked about it a little bit, and I showed you an article. The other one, which we won't spend much time on either, is Morgan. And Morgan is a logger. All right. Literally, that's what it is. It's a logger. What does that mean? That it can log things out typically to the console. All right. And it's one way of doing it. Plus, when you do this, you can set it up in different modes. A lot of times what people do is they use Morgan while they're testing. This wouldn't, again, be the kind of thing you'd want to put into a production environment. But there are different ways. It says here format and options, and there are a bunch of different options in here. So you'll notice when you look, it says immediate, write log line on request instead of response. This means that requests will be logged even if the server crashes. So again, it's another thing that you can use, especially if you're running into trouble and your program does keep crashing. You may have noticed already that when your program does crash and you get a little red screen there on your black, instead of white text, you get the red text. They usually have a pretty decent error message of where the problem is. All right. But sometimes maybe not perfect, or maybe you still don't understand. Skip, as it says, you can determine if logging has been skipped. There's stream. All right. As it says, output stream for writing log files. The ones, again, that you might use are the next two, and those are dev and short. Dev, as it says, it color codes the response, and it says if it's been successful, it'll be in green. If it's an error, it'll be in red. If there were warnings, it'll be in yellow, etc. And the short, what the short does is it doesn't give you everything back. It gives you just what people have considered to be the most important stuff, so to speak. So again, I went through that quickly, hopefully not too quickly, but I just wanted you to understand what was going on here. So with that said, all right, I'm going to go back and take one last look here. So we've got node modules, we've got our app.js, we've got our package.json, and we've got our package lock.json. All right, I'm going to bring up right now, I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to grab my folder, and I'm going to drag it in to Visual Studio Code. There it is. So now I've got everything in here. Let's very quickly just write a little bit of stuff into our app.js file. We'll test it, we'll make sure it works, and then we're taking our first break. So I'm going to go into app.js. There'll be nothing really new here. Let me close that so we've got plenty of room. So I'm going to do my const express equals require express const logger. I guess that's new. All right. Equals require Morgan. You can call it Morgan too, of course, but since it's a logger, it kind of makes sense to do that. Const, we'll have our body parser. Our const app equal express. And finally, we'll set up a port. Pick out your favorite number for a port. I'm just going to use process.env.port or 3355. Okay. And then finally, we're going to do a little bit of app.use, but not too much. We're not worrying. We're working virtually strictly on the back end right now. All right. We're not concerned with very much of the stuff that's in the front end. We're going to do nothing today with EJS. All right. We're going to do nothing today with setting up views or setting up a public folder. We'll get to all that stuff, but not right now. So in here, I'm going to do an app.use, and I'm going to tell it to use logger, which is Morgan, and I'm going to tell it to use it in the development mode, which I just showed you. All right. And we'll have our app.use, and we'll put in our old body parser .url, because we are going to use this, our URL encoded. And we will have our extended. It really doesn't matter. We can make it false. We can make it true. It shouldn't matter. I made mine false. And we're going to set up a simple route. But let's write it a little bit differently than we've written it before. And what I mean is we'll still have our request and our response, and we'll put in our fat arrow function. None of that, none of that has changed. Right? None of that has changed. All right. But in here, and we've always been putting in a res.send or whatever. Let's send back some JSON. All right. And let's literally put down what it's going to be. So this is going to be our movies DB API. And we'll put in here, whoops, sorry, build REST API with MongoDB, Express, and Node.js. All right. Now, did we have to put in that much stuff? Of course we didn't have to. All right. So what doesn't it like here? Did I not close that? No, I did close that. So what doesn't it like? I didn't put one there. There we go. Okay. And I can't spell for blazes. All right. So this is what I've got in here. I'm making its text size a little smaller. So hopefully you can see everything. Move that over. I don't remember. I don't think so. So again, it's a res.json. All right. And in here, movies, db.api, and then what we're doing. And that is we are going to build a REST API with MongoDB, Express, and Node.js. There's not a lot of documentation out there about this, but literally what we're doing is we are building something with what's called the MEN stack. MEN, M for Mongo, E for Express, all right, and E for Express, and N for Node. So what does it like here? It says that was expected. What does it like? That. Not sure why it's giving me this right here. Wrote this before and it worked just fine. So let's see. It. Oh, I didn't finish my fat arrow. I'm sorry. There we go. So again, you can put whatever you want in here, is what I'm saying. If you don't like what I wrote, write whatever you want. This is our very, very simplistic little home route. All right. And then we'll do an app.listen, port, and we'll do our console.log and use a template literal app running on port. All right. That's all we need for right now. Okay. Hopefully you've had a chance. I'll keep talking, but hopefully you've had a chance to put all of that in. Okay. And again, if you say you can't read this message, it could be anything. Like I said, this is what I put. Build REST API with MongoDB, Express, and Node.js. All right. We're going to take a break in just about a minute or two, but it's a good time to come in and do a file, save. I'm going to go to view terminal. And in my terminal down here, I'm going to do my npm run dev start. I should get my message. Oh, it crashed. So what didn't it like? Uses a middleware function, got to get type. Let's see. Our type router requires a middleware function, but got a string. Huh. Not sure why that broke, but it did. And I'll tell you what, it is 1:20. Let's just take 10 minutes. And during that 10 minutes, I'm going to go see if I can debug this. Okay, so see you back here at 1:30. See what a day. All right, well, I found the error. The error, it doesn't like what I'm putting in here for that I'm putting in with Morgan. I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with it. I even went back and checked it. I changed the name from Logger to Morgan. That didn't do anything. But this is the right syntax, but it blows up. So if you do comment out that line, all right, that'll fix it. The other thing is somehow I had written in here Baudet parser instead of body parser. That wasn't helping either. But taking this then from the top, all right, I know this is bad review, but so we added Express. I did add this in here. It's going to be grayed out until I figure out what the problem is with this. Body parser and our app equal Express. We set the port. We brought in URL encoded, made it false, did an app.use. I added this. You don't have to, but I figured since we're doing some work with JSON anyway, we really should. So, and then we wrote it out. Now, if you do go through all this stuff, so to speak, that we're talking about right here, if you do go through all of it, all right, and what will happen is that when I go into my view terminal, it comes up clean, running on 3355. And if we come out there to 3355, this is what we get, which is basically just the JSON that we just asked for. All right, so that's it right there. Nothing big. All right, so nothing really new right there with what we've done so far. All right, so let's start doing some stuff that's going to be new. Okay. All right. So the next thing I'd like us to do then is let's go back into our root folder. I'm going to do this from the command line just because I find it easier. So I'm coming back here, and in here we're going to add I'm going to add 3 folders. The first folder I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and add a new folder. We're not going to use this now, but we will later. I'm going to call it config, and that'll put in our configuration stuff. All right, so that's the first thing. Then next, I'm going to add another folder that's going to be called routes. All right. And then finally, I'm going to add one more folder in here that I'm going to call API. All right. So what I've done in here so far is I have added 3 additional folders to our root folder. Remember that our root folder is MongoDB _REST API. Originally, it had in it just the package lock JSON file, the package JSON file, our node modules folder, and our app.js. So I've added into there a folder rather called routes, ROUTES, a folder called config, CONFIG, and one more folder called API. Then open up your API folder. We're going to add 2 more folders. The first one will be called controllers, and the second one will be called models. So you see what I'm trying to give you here is literally the MVC experience, for lack of better words. All right. Now, we're only going to a certain point today. All right. And that is, I want to get the user stuff in. I don't even know if we'll have time to do it all because we're going to type in a bit of code. All right. And I want to, as we're typing it in, I want to be able to have us go over it. So hopefully, at least, it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, you're going to let me know. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to come in here and we're going to create a model. So in your models folder right here, you can open that up. In fact, I'll do that from inside of here. I can do it here. That's fine. And I'm going to create a new file. And that new file is going to be called users.js, not EJS, users.js. All right, so one more time, if you take a quick look up on the screen, regardless of where you are, and if you look up here, all right, so now we've got a folder in here called API right underneath our root node, which is our Mongo, whatever we called it. All right, and in our API, we've got a controllers folder and we've got a models folder. In that models folder, we just created a users.js, which we're going to put code in a minute. Also, though, we've got a config folder under our root folder and a routes folder under our root folder, in addition to the node modules and the package lock.json, our app.js, and our package lock.json and package.json. So in our API, I'm going to open up this users.js file, which is totally empty. All right. And we'll put some stuff in. So the first thing, close this back up again so we've got plenty of room. Const mongoose equals require mongoose. Const bcrypt equals require bcrypt. And finally, const salt rounds, we will tell it to go 10 times. All right. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we want to come in and we want to define the user schema. All right. So I'm going to say const schema equals mongoose dot schema. And then we're going to actually create it. So const user schema equals new schema. This is nothing new. We've done this thing before. All right. We haven't created this one before, but we've done all this before. All right. So, all right. It's going to have 3 fields in it. Okay. We're just going to put name in there, and that's basically going to be a username. All right. We're going to put that in. We're going to put an email in, and we're going to put in a password. All right. And we're going to make all 3 of them required. And we're also going to set the trim function to true. So it should trim any leading or trailing spaces. So I'm going to say name. And again, type string. Trim true. And required true. All right. Just keep it simple like this. Next, we're going to have email, and we're going to put the same stuff in. All right. So I'm just going to copy this in. You really want to type that bad, then type it in. All right. So we've now got name, we've got email. I need a comma there, and that's why I'm getting that error. All right. So we've got name, we've got email. And we're going to add one more here, and that's going to be password. All right. Why I get that junk, I don't know. I like to put these on a separate line. You, of course, do not have to. All right. What doesn't it like here? Oh, I need a colon here, which I didn't put in. And password, which again is the same thing. All right. I'm going to go back so you can see all of it in just a second. All right. So again, this is our schema. All right. We are, for the first time, putting this schema into its own file. May not sound like a big thing, but it is. All right, because at the end of this, we are going to end up exporting this file so it will be able to be used by the other files in the program, most notably our routing files, our controller files, and if necessary, our app.js file. All right, so we required Mongoose, we required bcrypt. We haven't used bcrypt yet. We haven't used salt rounds yet. That's why they're grayed out. Then we came in and defined our user schema. All right. And each one of these fields, or each one of these, fields that are in here, all right, has got, I should say, each field name has got 3 fields in it. So we've got a name, we've got an email, and we've got a password. Each one of them are type string. Each one of them are set up so that they'll trim any extraneous spaces before or after, and each one is required. All right. Now, that's not it. We still have to basically do our bcrypt stuff in here. Not a lot, but put in about 2 or 3, 4 or 5 more lines and we're done with this routine. All right. Again, I'm just going to keep going and I'm taking for granted that if something doesn't make sense, you're going to ask. All right. So now I'm going to put a comment in here that says hash the user password before saving it to the database. And we've talked about that before. We want to make sure that what goes into just in case anybody would ever breach our data, we want to make sure that what's in there for passwords is encrypted. Every once in a while, you read about things on, or you hear about them on TV, or you read about them online where there have been breaches in security type of thing. All right. And it is amazing. There are still a lot of places that don't do this. They still store a lot of their stuff in clear text, meaning they haven't encrypted it. So our user schema dot pre, all right, we'll explain what that is in just a minute. Again, there's just a couple lines of code. So I'm going to give you this code. Then we're going to go over what all of it means. All right. There's literally 2 more lines of code, and then we'll do our export statement. Then we'll talk about the entire thing here. All right, and that is it. So I'm going to give you a second or two to type this in. Then we're going to take 5 minutes or so to go over everything that's in this file. And again, if it doesn't make sense, it's your responsibility to ask me. All right, so like I said, I'm going to shut up for a minute and give you time to type. All right, then, and we'll come back down to this, but let's just take the whole thing from the top. I believe at least lines 1 and 2 should make sense. All right, again, we are requiring those NPM modules, the Mongoose module from NPM and the bcrypt. We are setting the number of times we want to salt the password. And again, this is just some internal algorithm that it basically is going to run against the password. It'll encrypt it, then it'll encrypt the encryption, then it'll encrypt that encryption, and it does it 10 times. All right. Normally, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to set this up so that you have not done that you've encrypted it enough times that the average person who might want to try to go and break in, they're going to just give up. All right. There aren't a lot of people typically who are going to try to break into a system like this who have got things running where they're running different password combinations. They're just people out there trying stuff. All right. Okay. So then we define our schema as it says, and as we mentioned, so we first included Mongoose, all right, then we included bcrypt. We defined the salt round, which again is used for the hashing our plain text password. Now, what gets provided next? Well, this is the schema. I don't think there's anything else we have to say about this. Hopefully all that made sense. But when you look in here, you'll notice it says hash the user password before saving it to the database. All right. And what happens is Mongoose provides its own internal middleware that are called hooks that you can use to manipulate data either before you've inserted into the database or after you've inserted it into the database. We're using the pre here because we're trying to do it before it's been inserted. All right. And now it says we've used this, basically we've used this to hash the password before we saved it. All right. Now, when you look in here, you'll notice that we've got this.password. That's going to be the password that is going to be passed in from a registration form, which we'll build at another time. All right. So when you see the this.password, that's what it's talking about. The this keyword basically is referring in here, all right, to our user schema object. All right. Okay. So that's the first thing. And again, I'm not even going to say to you, hey, did that totally make sense? Just look at it this way. What's going to happen is we're eventually going to build a fairly simplistic form that'll have in it probably a username, a password, and possibly an email address. I guess we'll have all three of those. And then probably a button. All right. When we click that button, what's eventually going to happen is the system has to check and it has to say, okay, is there somebody in the database with that particular combination? All right, so how does it do that? Well, it has to take the password that we put in, all the other information that's in there, the email address and the username, it does not have, those aren't encrypted, but the password is encrypted. So what we're doing in here is we're encrypting what the user put in for a password so we can check that against what's in the database, along with checking the other information that's in the database. All right. Hopefully what I just said made at least a little bit of sense. All right. Okay. So that's the first thing. Now we've come in and we've created a model. The other thing that's important about this is this statement. Module.exports. All right. Since we put it down at the bottom of the program like this, basically virtually everything that's up above it is going to now be available to the rest of the program as long as the rest of the program brings that in. What do I mean brings that in? Well, we've been using our own require statements, but so far, all of our require statements have been requiring things that have been third-party middleware, or they've been things that have been built into Node like Path or whatever. Now we're writing basically our own stuff. So if we want to bring in our own files, this is how we're going to do it. All right, so I'm going to do a file save. I don't think I made any mistakes in here. We'll find out later, I guess, but I'm going to close this file. All right, now I'm going to come in again and I'm going to write another one of these files, but I've already written in models, I've already written a users.js, right? I already have. Now I want to come into controllers and I want to write a users.js. So with my controllers highlighted like this, I'm going to click new file and I'm again going to put in users.js. So I now have a controllers users.js, which is empty, and a models users.js, which we just wrote. All right, gets a little confusing, but notice how it appends everything. It shows that it's a control, one's a controller and one's a model. All right, we care about this one now. So we're building the associated controller file that's going to go along with this stuff. Okay, all right. In fact, let me close this again. And this is about, oh, I don't know, like 30 or 40 lines. Okay. We're going to go through this and then we're going to write a route. And I'll explain all of these as we're going along. And that's going to be it for today. All right. That should get us till somewhere around 2:30 or so. All right. So now what you should notice about this first line that's in here. Okay. We have to go // Remember, right now, we're in the controllers folder. So when we go up to ... now we're back in our main folder. Then we go over to models, and then we're bringing in users, which is the one we just created. All right. So that's the first thing. Then we need bcrypt. All right. And then we need JWT. We're going to actually use that now. Right. And I'm not stupid enough that I'm going to sit there and say, hey, does all this totally make sense? Because very little of it may make sense. All right. And hopefully, once we put everything together, it'll make more sense. Okay. So we've got our choice. We can do a module.exports at the bottom of the program, or as we'll do here, just so you can see it, you can also do it at the top of the program. So I'm going to type in here module.exports equal, and I'm going to put in a curly brace. So basically, the next 30 or more lines that we write are all going to be exported. All right, so they will everything that's in here will be available. Why is that important? Because the routes that we're going to write next, all right, the routes, basically, they're going to need to be able to use this controller. All right. We will have 2 routes that we're going to create with this. And when I tell you this, believe it or not, it should make sense to you. We're going to have one route that one controller we're going to write right now that's going to be a create controller. So that's if somebody comes in and they are trying to basically create, so that they're going to be able to create an account or whatever you want to call it. The other one will be authenticate. And again, the difference is, are they registered or are they not registered, for lack of better words? All right, so first let's do the create. All right, and we're going to have in here require, response, and we're going to have a next in here. You may have noticed that before, that we had a next. And typically what that means is, when we're writing our own code like this, you typically, if you don't want anything special to happen, but you want control to go back to the program, you just write next, paren, because that gets you out of what you're writing and back to the system code, for lack of better words. All right, so user model dot create. And this is all going to be information that we're going to end up getting in. So this is information that we are going to end up getting in from our form. Okay. We're going to have to do a post. We're going to, all that stuff comes later. But we're going to be in here. We're going to be a request.body.name. And that'll be our name. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me try that again. Try the whole thing again. Name, request.body.name. All right. And let me put this on multiple lines just because I want you to be able to see it. All right. So there's the first one. And then we'll have the email, which will be request.body.email. And then finally, we'll have the password, which will be request.body.password. All right. So again, these are all things that we are going to end up bringing into our program momentarily. All right. Now, when we do all this stuff, when we do it all, that's just one thing that we're passing in here. So I'm going to put here a comma. And when we do this, it's either going to work or it's not going to work. So it'll be either give us an error if it doesn't work or a result if it does work. All right. And you've seen this kind of thing before. All right. This should be really nothing new to you. All right. Let me move these over a little or tab these in a little. There. Hopefully then that makes it a little easier for you to read. All right. So this is, we're going to be attempting in here, if it's a create, to create a new account, a new user, whatever it is you want to call this. We're going to be attempting to create that. And in order to do that, we're going to have passed into us, for us, whatever you want to say. All right. We're going to have passed into us a person's name, their email address, and their password. All right. Now, this is where it's going to look a little bit different here, for lack of better words. Now I'm going to say if error. So in other words, if it fails, we try to do this. You didn't provide a field. There's already somebody in there with that name, whatever it happens to be. We're going to call next, and we're going to pass the error to it. The system basically is going to end up taking care of that, for lack of better words. All right. Otherwise, well, you know what otherwise is. Remember, it either fails, which we just handled, or it succeeds, which is what we're doing in here. All right. So we're going to do a res.json. I want you to get used to writing more JSON. And our key is going to be, we're just going to say success. All right. And our message that goes along with this, I'm putting it on 2 lines just so you can see it all okay. So our message is just going to be user successfully added. All right. And when you do this, there's also a thing in here typically is data. Well, we don't have any data. We just had a message. So we're going to say data null. Hit enter here. There we go. Now, that may make very little sense. So let's take a second and go over it. If it fails, we're just telling the system to handle it. If it succeeds, it should give us a message that says success, and it should tell us that the user was added. All right. And maybe this would be better off on the line up above there. So it says success and the user was added. We don't have any data to add. That's literally it. That's it. So this right here, starting on line 6 and ending on line 20, so about 15 lines, that is our create. All right. And if we're not going to create, we are going to authenticate. So I'm going to put a comma here, and now I'm going to put in authenticate. I didn't want to go nutso here with putting in too many comments. So if I'm not putting in enough, again, let me know and I'll put some more in. So again, this is expecting that we've got a user in here that's already there. So we're not trying to create a new user. We're trying to authenticate an existing user so we can authorize his or her, what they can do, for lack of better words. All right. So we're going to come in here. Again, this is just authenticating. So we're going to say user model dot find one. That should sound familiar to you. All right. And it's going to be the email, req.body.email. And just like we saw previously, okay, this can either error out or we can get a result. So we can have an error, and we can call this next thing result, or anything you want to call it. We just called it user info because that's what it is. All right. This is going to look, some of it at least, is going to look similar to what we just did. In fact, I can grab this, all that, which says, again, if we have an error, let the system handle it. Move these over. Else. And now there's more stuff that we have to do. All right. Why? Because now what we have to do is we have put in, so all we've checked so far is, does that email address exist? That's all we checked. If that email address exists, we're now into this else that you see right here. So we're on line 30. So now what we want to do in here is we want to check to see if that password and basically that information that they put in is in the database. All right. So in here, in this else, we're going to have another if else. All right. So we'll put in here, I'm just going to put in for now success. And then down a little bit later, we're going to put down in here failure. All right. And for the success, that's going to be an if. And unfortunately, this is a little ugly. All right. But it's going to be bcrypt dot compare sync req dot body dot password user info dot password. All right. And what am I doing here? Why do I have? Okay, so let's see. I do need another paren there. I guess that would make sense. Think think outside the box. Don't even be worried about what these different things mean, but think about what it means. This is what we're passing in inside of later, what we will be passing in when we are attempting to log in. So this will be information coming from a form. This will be information that will be coming in, and that information is already in the database. All right. So what we're saying here is if they matched, okay, it's success. So there's 2 lines of code that we want to put in here. And again, fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to look at this, there's a little bit of typing that we have to put in. All right. So we're going to say const token. This is that JWT token equals JWT dot sign, and you'll notice the IntelliSense kicks in. I think I'm going to have to put this on multiple lines, and that's okay. We'll do that in just a second. So we've got ID, user info dot underscore ID, req dot app dot get, your secret key, not done yet. Giving me an error, and I'm not sure why right now. Oh, it's because I reproduced this. All right, so let's see. Trying to see if I'm missing anything or whatever. So ID, user info ID. There's a mistake. Okay, req app.get secret key expires in 1 hour. We're going to go over what all this means in just a moment. All right, that's the first line. Remember, even though I put it over 3 lines, that's 1 line of code. All right. And then res.json, kind of like we did before, we're going to say status, success, message, user found. Now, when we did this before, we had all this stuff, and then we put at the end data null. We don't want that anymore because now we've actually got data. All right. So and like I said, we are going to go over every bit of this in just a moment. All right, I'll give you a second to put that in. The else is very short compared to this. All right, so in fact, I'll put that in just so you can see it. Because it's very similar to this, except instead of a success message, we're going to get a failure message. Okay. And kind of mercifully, that's it. Okay, we're almost done with this routine. The next one we write is much shorter, but I want to go over all of this stuff first. Again, I'll move it back in just a second, but when you look here, all right, we're attempting to find a match in what the user put in as opposed to what's in the database. If we couldn't find a match, we're just going to have the system basically handle it with an error. If we get down to here, there was a match. In other words, there was an email that matched, but we still have to go in and check the password. All right. So we have to see if that password matches the one that they put in matches with what is in the database. That's what we're doing right here. The if statement on lines 31 through 38 are checking for a match. All right. So if there was a match, it's going to put this stuff in. It's creating a token. That token is going to hold the ID. All right. That secret key, don't worry about it right now because that's something we're going to end up putting into our config file. All right. This token that they give us is going to expire in an hour. All right. And then we're going to basically send back a message in JSON that says success, that the user was found. All right. And that's a mistake. It's not usered. Right? And we're basically, for the data, it's the user's information and the token. All right. If it fails, all we're simply doing in here is we are coming in and we are saying, hey, if this fails, send back an error message. All right. That is it for this. Now, again, there are two methods in here. The user controller includes the user model, it includes JS Web Token, and it includes bcrypt. We've got the create method, and as we've already said, the create method is used to create new users. It attempts to see if it can create a new user. That again is what we did up here, right there. The other one is authenticate. All right. In here, we're searching for the user in the database by their basically their email ID, and we're comparing the plain password that they passed in through the login form with the hashed password that's in the database. If they match, we're generating, so that's back down in here, we're generating a JSON web token, and we're passing it the user ID and that secret key, and we're setting the 1 hour for how long that particular thing is going to be valid. All right. Now, two things. First, if you want to read more, you can go back to that jwt.io page. Also, if you do go on, secondly, if you do go on and out and into npmjs.org and you bring up JSON Web Token, we did that, but very quickly. All right, there's a GitHub page there that'll explain some of this stuff, and maybe better than what I did. All right, so we've come in, and what have we added so far? All right, we've come in here, we added a controllers folder, and we put a user controller in there. We added a models folder, and we put a user model in there. Tomorrow, we're going to come back in, and we're going to add a movie controller and a movie model. We'll add those tomorrow. Now, when I do those tomorrow and I create the movie model, I'm going to do it based off of the database that I created. I will show you that tomorrow. Yours might be different because what I put in there for those movies, I had what? I had the movie name. I had the year the movie was made. I had the running time for the movie. I had the, what else did I have? The rating for the movie. And there's probably one more thing. All right. But that's what I based it off of. In fact, did I keep this? I took a picture of the way that it was. This was how it was in the MySQL file. But I've got a year made, a running time, a category, and a rating. All right. Okay. So one more thing that I'd like to try to do today, and that is I want us to go back into here so we can basically close that up and close that up. But I want you to go into your routes folder, and please remember this the folder structure that we have in here. We've got an API folder. That API folder has two folders in it. It has a controllers folder and it has a models folder. Presently, each one of those has just one file in it. So the controllers folder has a users.js file. The models folder has a users.js file. We've got an empty config folder and we've got an empty routes folder. Well, we're going to fix that right now. And the good news is with what we put in here for our routes, we're only going to put in about 5 to 10 lines of code and then we're done. All right. So in routes, I'm going to right mouse click on this and again, choose new file, or you can go in here, click on this and click there. It doesn't matter. And again, we're going to have users.js. All right. Make sure that that is underneath the routes. So again, how do I know these worked? If I click here, this users should disappear. If I click here and do it again, the user should disappear. And the same thing with routes. All right. So we're going to set up the associated route in here. Again, about, I think, less than 10 lines of code. Const express equals require express. All right. Now, even if you're typing, stop for a second and look at the screen, please. Do not put in this line. I'm going to put it in, but I'm going to remove it right away. Do not put in const app equals express. Don't put that line in. Why? Because that's the way you do it if you put all the information in the app.js file. We're not doing that. We're going to have our routing information in our routes file here in our routes folder. All right. So we want to say const router equals express.router, and that must be a capital R. All right. Because when we do this, instead of now saying app dot something, we're going to say router dot. All right. This is supposed to be more self-descriptive that we're doing this way because we are in a routes folder. So we are saying router dot something. All right. So what do we need? Well, we have to bring in our controller. So const user controller equals require. And again, we have to let it know where it lives. So dot dot slash API slash, notice how the IntelliSense is finding all this, controllers slash users. So it found everything, which says to me, as far as I know at least, everything that we put in there has worked. All right. Now you might look at that and go, that's fine and dandy, whatever. What the hell did you even do that for? This is where the magic starts to come in. Now I can say router.post / register user controller dot, and notice, well, I thought it would find it, but user controller dot create. All right, we're telling it when we go and we do the register route to go over to our user controller and find the create method that we previously put in there. You can probably guess what's coming next. Router.post authenticate. And again, that will be user controller dot authenticate. One more line. Right. So in this route, we included the user controller and we put in the 2 post routes there that we're mapping through that user controller. All right. Those are the register route and the authenticate route. So remember, this, when we call this, it's going to come in here and it's going to call the create thing that we just put in there, right there. And when we do this and we got the authenticate, it's again going to come in and call that authenticate. All right. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's enough for today. That was a heck of a lot to throw at you. There's a lot of code. There was a lot of explanation. We looked at a lot of new stuff today. All right. Now, before we shut it down, does anybody have any questions, or does anybody need me to show anything on the screen that I maybe went over too fast or whatever? Anybody? All right. Then I'm taking for granted that what we went over at least has started making sense. Okay. Tomorrow we'll be worrying and more concerned with setting up our model and our controller and our routes, I should say, for the movies schema. All right. So that's what we've got to look forward to. I have no idea if we're going to finish this tomorrow or not. I didn't have any idea how long this today was going to take. All right. Thanks for sticking with me. I will see you tomorrow. All right. And I will save this. Okay. And I'm really hesitant, just so you know, I'm really hesitant to just say, oh, I'll save this and I'll put this out on GitHub now. I don't think it's the case with either of you, not at all. So please, I'm not talking to you. I don't know if there's anybody else in the class, though, that might say, I don't even have to type this stuff in. You know, I can just grab his repo. I don't like doing that because you miss out when you don't type the stuff in yourselves. That's my feeling. All right, you may or may not agree with that. All right, so again, thanks for sticking around, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Remember, we will start up right at 12:05. I'll see you then. Thanks.